Welcome into the Driveline Podcast. We got the R&D crew here. You may have previously seen or heard Research and Drinks. They made it 99 episodes. We're here to pick up on the 100th. Whole new crew here. Previously run by Anthony Brady, Kyle Lindley are both with the Phillies now, and then Alex Caravan is with Penn, doing some data science stuff. They did a great job building an audience here, and we're looking to build on that and get everyone back into what Driveline R&D is up to. So kind of going around the horn here. Josh, you're also with the Phillies now. Do you want to give the intro there?
Yeah, we got the Driveline R&D Podcast at home crew here.
Yeah.
Three new faces. I'm Josh Hejka, current minor league player with the Phillies organization. Hanging out with R&D podcast legends Lindley and Brady every day. Also work as I think technically the longest running intern in Driveline baseball history.
I think you do have it.
Yeah. So yeah, currently working on an intern, works on baseball ops stuff with Lambo and all kinds of various tasks like pulse stuff with Max Engelbrecht and all kinds of random various things.
Marek, you want to introduce yourself?
What you got, Marek?
Yeah, Marek Ramilo, not with the Phillies, though was hired by other Philly, Dan O'Coin. So shout out to all those guys. Part-time R&D analyst, mostly in baseball ops with these two guys. Lately almost working exclusively on Arsenal metrics stuff, but hoping to prove that I'm more than a one-trick pony and talk about non-Arsenal things on this thing. So
Marek, you got to let the people know what you do during the day too.
Yeah, what's your real job, dude?
Yeah, quant trader, which is a lot of overlap with thinking about some of the quantitative methods that we use in baseball these days. So really makes it easy that writing code in Python is useful in both jobs.
Yeah, definitely analytically driven in both ends. I'm Jack Lambert. I'm now running the baseball operations department. Was hired by Dan O'Coin. I never worked for Dan in the same call. He told me he was leaving for the Phillies. So we all worked for Alex Caravan for a while. But yeah, here we are now. Figured first episode, we'd start off just with kind of a refresher on what does it mean for a baseball training facility to have a research and development team. It's not something a lot of facilities have. There are a lot of places you can go to get great coaching. And this kind of has that niche intersection of research being done, products being made, and elite training happening at the same level. I think it makes a lot of sense to start off with Hejka, like since you've kind of seen both sides of it, working in R&D and also having an active playing career. What do you think are some of the advantages, just broadly speaking, then we can get into specifics of having that intersection within the same company?
Yeah, no doubt. I think you hit the nail on the head with, like, obviously you can get really good training in a lot of different places, and just quite frankly, a lot of those places just implement the base Driveline program, and Driveline has kind of saturated that market in terms of the actual training capabilities. What attracted me to about working in the Driveline R&D department is I think there's a lot of insights you gain as a player being in it every day and understanding, like, here's something, is there something that could help me as a player? Is there something that could help me on the field, help me understand my opponent a little bit better? And the reason I wanted to work in the R&D department here is because it gives me the tools and the empowerment to basically answer those questions for myself and help myself as a player. There's a lot of aspects that aren't covered in basically just normal training, and I think that can range from a large variety of the topics that we're going to talk on today, whether that's getting really good stuff models to better understand the pitch design process rather than just going in blind, whether that's using IMU-based sensors to track your throwing workloads and make sure that you're putting yourself in an optimal place every day throwing wise. There's all kinds of things that you can push the envelope on that obviously baseball's come a very far way in the last 5, 10, 15 years, but there's still a large way to go, and I think an R&D department allows you to start answering those questions before anybody else. And it just gives you a pretty holistic experience, a cohesive experience across all parts of the game, coaching and playing as well. So I think it's a very powerful thing to have as a facility.
I think also, like, some of the aspects of R&D that go kind of under the radar, like right now, I think of the example of like plyo balls. It's something just everyone does, but like that started having a data-driven approach, having a research team that can take previous research done. I think it was from the University of Hawaii or something. And I mean, throwers have been doing it for 40 years and implementing that in baseball. That takes that sort of research and development team. So there are a bunch of places that can implement plyo balls or use a pulse sensor, but will they find the next version of the plyo ball or the next version of the pulse sensor? It's hard to do
Or
if you don't have
understand how to
people working
implement those tools like the most appropriately. And like as you continue to like, you know, there's a system that works and there's a system that like generally works for most people, but figuring out the way to fine tune that system, figuring out new approaches, you need some sort of way to test out hypotheses and seeing what actually works and what actually doesn't.
Yeah, 100%.
It's probably worth, I don't know, pointing out that the plyo ball problem is something that arguably we could continue to push forward. And even though we already know with reasonable confidence that, you know, going through these exercises and these drills with plyo balls should map to, you know, velo gains or other advances in development that we've already accounted for. Among the things that's nice about having everything in-house and having this full stack team is we can continue to innovate on things that originate from like hypotheses that we have just among ourselves. You know, maybe Hejka, you go through your plyo circuit and decide you want to experiment with some other form of drill or technique or tap into something that we haven't previously done in the plyo space. Just a really quick feedback loop of being able to say, let me try this out, and then let me go to the R&D guys and see if this had any meaningful gains in what I'm trying for. It seems like a unique sort of system in that way.
And I think the perfect example of that is a couple years ago when the expanded plyo set was dropped, because it filled this. Basically the original plyo set, you know, had one underweight ball, a ball that's comparable to a baseball, and a couple of overload balls. And we realized, based on, you know, combinations from our pitching department and our R&D department, what we realized is that players should be and could be and should be more focused on either an underweight block or an overweight block based on what specifically they are good at and what they're not good at. And that expanded plyo set basically gives us a much deeper toolbox to train athletes. And I think the plyo velo calculator, which came out at the same time, is like the R&D side of that, where we can see, like, based on how hard you throw each of these plyo balls, we can dictate what your training should look like in the next block, because we can tell which ones you're good at, which ones you're not as good at. And kind of one of the, I think, founding theses of Driveline is that most guys should be working on things they're not that good at. And we can hammer that home and then retest in a couple months, see if you're better, and update your training plan accordingly from there.
Yeah, I think that ties into just that example there, as simple as it is to draw the velo of plyo balls to what should be expected, or your mound velo to what you should expect for different plyo balls. That's like the modeling in its most basic sense. But Marek, I'm going to tie in something you touched on and just kind of testing out hypotheses and theories that we believe to be true. I think the Arsenal models are a great example of that. So for context, we building on Stuff Plus, which measures the value of a pitch based on only the characteristics of ball flight without knowing the end location. So the spin rate, the break profile, the velocity, the release point. We've seen those models kind of reach a plateau in how they've done. Anyone that watches pitching or anyone who watches baseball can recognize a pitcher who is crafty or knows what they're doing, is using a certain pitch to set up another pitch later, like Greg Maddux, the professor, is not a nickname you get on accident. So Marek, do you want to kind of tell people about how you started testing that theory with our Arsenal models?
It's part of a constant exercise of putting labels to the residuals that explain player performance in different ways. And as you said, Stuff was kind of the first building block, the first known contributor to pitch quality and overall pitcher quality. And as we went further down the chain, started with command, and not to say that all these things are fully explained by any means. There's still a lot to say about stuff. There's still a lot to say about command, which we'll get into a little bit here too. The interaction of one pitch with another was kind of an open-ended problem that we wanted to dive into. And so it's the sort of thing that you can, as you said, generate hypotheses just by watching the game and listening to color from the broadcast, or even listen to players talk about, I wanted to add this pitch to my arsenal. Maybe it was because I was looking at a movement plot and realized that, the coverage on this plane was not exactly what it needed to be. And so let me find a way to add this to my mix, and hopefully that generates better results. So we wanted to take things a step further and derive some methods on how we could evaluate whether or not you were adding to your arsenal. And that's especially interesting these days when year of the mix seems to be the talk of the town on Twitter and such. We have tools now for evaluating, like, are you being constructive? Are you doing something that again contributes to your performance in a meaningful way, or is this all kind of superfluous?
And I think
oh, sorry, you go, Lambo.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, we talk about these at a high level and it can sound like they're kind of abstract, but the trends in the game have really followed this modeling kind of influx that we've seen. In that, what was it, 2 years ago, it was the sweeper. That was the craze. Everyone's throwing that sweeper. And if you look back on the people who had stuff models 2 years ago, sweeper was by far the best pitch. Year after that, it's the splitter. Splitter rates, did they double last year? It went from something like 1.5% to 3% or something. That was a filthy stuff plus pitch by that. And you see over the course of this, tying in with Arsenal models, the usage of 3 fastballs using a 4-seam, sinker, and cutter has skyrocketed. It's this, and which is, I think, is a combination of both stuff plus and Arsenal effects. So from the stuff perspective, we know that sinkers to opposite hand hitters are not going to be, generally speaking, super effective. We know that cutters to opposite hand hitters are. People are optimally using their fastballs. Pitch design is getting better, and you can kind of parlay those multiple pitches into more ways you can attack a guy, basing on our Arsenal models and what pitches are setting up other pitches. So it can be abstract to talk about this stuff, but it is truly happening on the ground floor of what's happening in MLB.
And I think it's important to recognize that this isn't a static problem to solve. If, for example, pitchers recognize that there's this market inefficiency where throwing a bunch of sweepers ends up getting a lot of results because batters haven't seen that shape before. And as the years go on, batters start seeing more and more of the sweeper shape in something we probably call, or Marek would call, like league level familiarity. As the league starts throwing more and more sweepers, batters start experiencing it more and more, and batters start becoming more familiar with it. And the effectiveness of those sweepers go down. You see the same thing with four-seam fastballs at the top of the zone, which were extremely effective a few years ago, are getting slightly less effective. And sinkers are making a bit of a comeback. And it's this constant, I want to say, chess match, which is funny because one of the initial analogies that Marek gave when we were talking about Arsenal scores is this concept from chess where bishops and knights are both worth about 3 pawns. But what people have noticed is that what elite high-level chess players have known intuitively, and then backed up by some of these computer engines that are used in chess now, is that both bishops together tend to outperform a bishop and a knight, or 2 knights together. So there's this additive effect beyond just the raw value of the piece. And people who have played baseball a long time kind of intuitively know this as well. With you see, certain pitches playing off each other well. Basically, exactly what you said, Lambo. These Greg Maddux types from history that can play pitches off each other really well. This idea of tunneling that's existed for the last few years. And now, in the same way that the chess engines kind of confirm the intuition of high-level grandmasters, we're noticing that our models are confirming the intuition of high-level coaches and pitchers. And so that's where we see these residuals of our pitching models being explained by these Arsenal effects that we're noticing, and certain pitch types. For example, cutters being used as a quote-unquote bridge pitch. actually could potentially increase the efficacy of a sweeper and a sinker paired with it. So I think it's pretty cool seeing that effect, and I'm sure the batters are going to end up adjusting a different way, and then pitchers are going to adjust again. It's just this constant back and forth of figuring out market inefficiencies on both sides and having an adjustment.
And to tie it back to how are we able to take advantage of the fact of Driveline set up as this facility that brings together an R&D team, baseball ops team, and say a pitching floor. It's really easy for, say, the three of us to get on a Zoom and shoot the breeze for an hour and a half about Arsenal metrics and theories and ideas that sound really good from an analyst's perspective. Obviously, Hejka is more than an analyst and can bridge this gap for us, but
Yeah, I'm an intern, dude.
yeah, right.
More
Yeah,
than an analyst,
you're
I'm
the
an
lead
intern.
the lead.
Senior intern. We can take that, all these ideas and also float them by our trainers, who can then kind of test out some of the ideas, be a sounding board for us. Again, taking some of the intuition that they've developed by working with guys that have these problems that can then narrow our focus on what exactly are we trying to solve. I can't imagine just being isolated from real players and being in a real environment, just like, again, banging out code, and this becomes not really a baseball problem when you get too far removed from the actual game, and Driveline does a good job of keeping it all under one roof.
And yeah, even just thinking like of this basic example of like, pitch design and models, right? So like if you have access to really good models, but you don't have access to like a really good pitching department or pitch design department, it's really hard to make those models actionable for yourself, right?
Mhm.
So you can know that this particular shape is something that you should pursue, or like adding this pitch is important. But if you don't have a good coach who's able to break down those concepts, communicate them to you, and then teach you how to actually throw that pitch, there's like having those models in isolation just is very, very difficult to apply. On the opposite end, if you have access to really good training, but you don't have access to really good models, maybe you have a coach who's really good at communicating information.
It might be
But
the
you
wrong
don't have these
information.
models.
Yeah,
Say that again.
it might be the wrong information. I mean, you're going
It
off
might be
your
the
coach. Yeah.
It might be the wrong information, and there's no way to quantify or like get feedback.
Mhm.
And it's more so I view the models as kind of like a guide or like a map in the process, and it helps you know where to look. It might not give you the complete answer, but it helps you very strongly narrow down where to look.
100%.
And those two just gel really well together. Basically, even this basic example of just like pitch models and pitch design, I think there's just a really, really big additive effect, kind of like the two bishops,
Yeah.
kind of like a cutter and a sweeper. It's the same thing in our department.
No, it was really cool this year to Stuff Plus and Command Plus, Location Plus have previously influenced our pitch designs, but this year specifically, a few conversations with trainers were really cool to have conversations on. I have these two options for a Stuff Plus gainer, but what's going to fit best in the arsenal? So seeing these in action of really getting granular with like, do we want to increase Stuff Plus? Do we want to increase whiffs in certain counts? Do we want to increase chases? Having the arsenal model
Contact pitch.
Yeah, exactly. Like we know that mix and match are the name of the models, and we know that they correlate to whiff rates and swing rates. So using those, we were able to give recommendations that off first glance from spring training seem to be solid, that that this may work to accomplish what we want in getting these chases on two strikes, or kind of this shock factor type pitch that will be taken by the batter almost certainly. That'd be like your Kershaw curveball or a sweeper if everything's going east-west, or mainly just west and you need something to go east. But no, it's really cool to see him tied back to earth, and this is not a claim that baseball's been solved. It's like Marek said, not a static issue. It is totally dynamic, but hoping that we can stay ahead of that curve as we continue to develop on them.
You talked about components a little. Do you want to soft launch IPV at all?
Yeah, Hejka, you want to give a little overview on the old versus new methodology and why it's valuable for pitchers?
Yeah, very, very basically. So if we think about our two separate models, we have stuff we have stuff, which is just using ball flight metrics. And then we have we have pitching, which is originally called pitching plus, originally called stuff plus. The original pitching takes the ball flight metrics that Lambo mentioned, like velocity, movement, etc., and adds in location and count context. And it's a really difficult problem for models to solve because there's so much noise that happens on a given pitch. A pitcher could throw the exact same pitch to multiple different batters and have very, very drastic results. A pitcher could throw the exact same pitch in the exact same location and get drastically different results based on the umpire that's calling that game, whether he calls it a strike or a ball. So our goal was we wanted to basically break down this problem a little bit from the model side, to give the computer a little bit more information, and basically, essentially break it down, instead of just training on the result by itself, which is what we used to do. So we would say, based on all these metrics, predict the outcome of this pitch, the expected run value of this pitch. We're calling it our component-based approach, but it's basically we step through the basic decision tree that happens. So first thing is, you throw a pitch. Does the batter swing or does he not? What's the probability the batter swings? Okay. Let's say the batter doesn't swing. If a batter doesn't swing, the only other outcomes are ball, called strike, hit by pitch. And so we can break it down and say, what's the probability of all of those happening? Same thing if a batter does swing. What's the probability that he swings and misses? If he doesn't swing and miss, what's the probability that he hits a foul ball? What's the probability he hits a ball in play? If he hits a ball in play, what's the probability it's a single, a double, a triple, home run? And we can basically break it down like this and then weight it by the run value of those exact outcomes happening. So doing this, we've seen our models improve, and it makes sense intuitively due to the fact that it's more in line with like what is actually happening in the game. It's not, there's no such thing as like this pitch happens and then it's like a run value appears out of nowhere.
Yeah.
The run value is some combination of the probabilities of all these things, right? The value of a pitch is some combination of the expected called strike of that pitch, the expected swing and miss of that pitch, and like the expected ability to limit damage. And so breaking down the models that way seemed to offer significant improvements over our previous model.
I think also an underrated improvement is the nerds love it when your R squared gets better to predictive stuff next year, which is great. We improved our models, but they are so much more interpretable now that you have these components. You can see, why is this pitch valuable? Is it because, let's say Kyle Hendricks and Paul Skeens throw a sinker and splinker down and in. They may have very similar value, but going to be very clear that Hendricks comes from the fact that the hitter's very likely to take it and it's going to be a called strike. Skeens comes from the fact that it's freaking 95 miles an hour and it doesn't matter if he swings or anything, they're not doing anything with it. So having that context allows, like, instead of having stuff plus, you have stuff based X whiff, stuff based swing percentage, all these different component stats that really paint a more complete picture than just one all-encompassing value. Which I think, like, those one values, they can be super helpful for fantasy baseball or something like that. And this type of application we're striving for, though, is we're a training facility. We need to know the individual skills that you have and where you're flawed, where you're excelling, and where we can stand to find some room to improve. So having that component-based approach really helps us from that perspective. And everyone has a different use case for a model, and that is our use case. And I think the best application of something like a stuff model or pitching value model.
Absolutely. And I know Marek has done some work on this before too, but I think what we're ultimately going for here is understanding the game context. And I can let Marek speak to this, but in certain situations, you want a ground ball. And so your pitches, in theory, you can model with this component-based approach what the expected ground ball rate is on each of these pitches that you throw. In other situations, you want to swing and miss. In other situations, maybe you want a called strike. And so you can optimize for these different percentages. Marek, do you want to add anything to that?
Just that's where all the value of thinking in outcome space comes to shine, because at any moment in time, in a vacuum, you generally are going to want a whiff. Like that's the best thing that can happen because you're maximizing your damage prevention that way. However, when you start to think about things like the scarcity of the number of pitches that you as a starter especially can throw, there can be a material benefit to getting through the batter in fewer pitches, getting through the lineup more efficiently. And how do you achieve that? You achieve that especially in a base out state with a runner on and an arsenal of pitches that could get you a ground ball by trying to reduce that. And at the risk of sounding like we're rediscovering something that every dad coach in the history of baseball has ever known, this has been a shortcoming of models, or at least the way we were doing pitch quality for the longest time. And a component-based approach, which is something championed by a lot of people in the space, was a necessary first step to unlocking this kind of thing.
Yeah, important to know, we did not invent the component-based approach, nor do we mean to claim to. We use it, and we believe it's the best application for our specific use case.
Advanced scouting, probably a fairly unique deliverable among the things that we provide, just because it is one way that we continue, the training ecosystem outside of, the walls of our facility for MLB clients. I mean, the way we were presenting recommendations to both the hitting and the pitching side changes pretty meaningfully when you take a component-based approach.
Yeah.
Doing.
And I think another value add here is one of the other historic downsides of some of these models is that it's all pitcher based, right? It's this pitcher's pitch is worth this, with no context for the batter they're facing. And so allowing us to break down the problem into components allows us to add a little bit more batter context in a more meaningful way. And by that, what we essentially do for our matchup model is we break it down into the equivalent of our hitting big three. We have swing decisions, contact quality, and damage power. And so we can basically do hitter level adjustments for each of these components and recalculate our metrics based on not just what the pitcher's pitch is expected to do, but what that pitcher's pitch is expected to do against that particular batter. And I think that's a very, very important value add as well for us, that the component-based approach helps unlock.
Yeah. And just kind of tying everything back to like the base issue of why do we have these models? One, to try and understand the game better, but two, we have literal athletes we support in season. Hejka, I actually just dropped you one of our advanced reports. Do you want to talk about, so we've just talked in depth about how these models work, and I feel like you have an interesting perspective in that you have sort of an analyst hat and literally a baseball player hat. Like when you were looking in depth at a model, how does that change when tomorrow you have to prep for a game? How do you like that information displayed? I think ours are pretty solid now, but yeah, kind of break down what you care about from the analyst side versus how it changes on game day when you have 13 hitters you got to be ready for.
Yeah, so I think for a little bit of context, I'm backing up my first Major League Baseball game tomorrow, so we'll see how it goes. I had Lambert drop me an advanced scouting report for Adam Simber versus the Tampa Bay Rays. So I don't have any Major League data on me, so we can't exactly get the exact scouting report from me, but we got something close. Adam Simber, who's a better pitcher than me, but it's close enough. And I think you bring up a really important point here, Lambo, which is you can have the best models in the world. You can have the best information in the world. You can know exactly what's the right thing to do is in any given situation. But if you can't communicate it to the athlete and it's not actionable, then there's no point, right? If I have to memorize a 256 branch decision tree to like be able to get the optimal result in every case, like that's unrealistic and it's never going to happen. And especially in the heat of the moment when you're competing. So one big thing that I care about a lot as a player, and I think it carries over and has implications for what has to be done on the model side. I'm a big believer that the back end should be as complicated and as crazy as it needs to be, as complex as possible, accounting for as many different things as possible, get the best possible correlations as possible. But when it's communicated to the athlete, it needs to be as simple and actionable as possible. In a perfect world, the what I think Marek and Lambo and I what we've all talked about before, is that the perfect scouting report at some level is you have an expected or a prescribed usage percentage based on the situation, and you random number generator in your head to figure out what pitch to throw, and you have a glove target, and that's where you should.
Hejka, what percentage of baseball players have a random number generator in their head? I think that may be
0, but that's
only.
My hot take is that I think all MLB scoreboards should have a random number generator from now on. That's what I'm
just so you can look up and see where what you're throwing.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. Oh, 254 mod 5. Okay, we got it. All right, that's fine.
Yeah, you were not thinking. You got your analyst hat on. You think the players know what a mod is?
No,
I don't mean to.
But,
yeah.
No, but I do think, and obviously that ignores some additional context, which we hope to eventually add as additional layers into our models, right? Which is like when you throw a pitch, like it obviously changes the batter's familiarity and expectations for the next pitch. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. But at the end of the day, I guess my entire point is that whatever you end up doing on the model side, whatever you end up doing on the back end side, it has to be greatly simplified and broken down to when it's presented to the athlete. Because if it's not actionable, it's not actually that good or that useful after all.
Can I take a very, very quick aside on that particular point?
Please.
That, explains that this is a data exercise, but some of these things are kind of confounded because you mentioned that when you throw a pitch, it affects the batter's expectations about what might come next. I think a novel approach to some of the stuff we're doing tests that assumption and understands that you may not have to actually throw a pitch in your arsenal to kind of distort the batter's expectations of what might be coming. Whether that's observed in game in the data, if they see one blip on the radar screen that, this guy has this flinker, he threw it once, it was really good, and so maybe he'll do it again in the future. Like, is that the kind of thing that needs to happen to pollute the batter's training set, or can it just be something that is not observed, but consistent with the type of pitcher that this guy is? He can probably achieve this, and whether or not this is in sample or whether or not like he's proven he can do this. I heard him talk to his beat guy 3 weeks ago about how he was playing with this in the off season. So now is that updating my expectations for what he might throw?
Marek, we're not going down the rabbit hole of Arsenal effects, taking into account news headlines. We can't tackle
all data, man. All data.
It's an interesting point, though. It's a good question, and part of the reason that, like, there are just limitations in how well you can predict future success. I mean, like, you're dealing with humans out there. You don't know. You can't get in the batter's mind. You can try to. You're not going to estimate it super well. But no, just everything's always changing. You don't know what they're actually thinking, why they're actually thinking it, and just makes it hard.
And then if the batters are aware that you're thinking about what they're thinking about, then the batters can. So like, the comment, it's all game theory, right? Like you think about, okay, that batter took a bad swing at that pitch. That means I should probably throw that pitch again. But the batter's also aware he took a bad swing at that pitch. So then he can maybe, make an adjustment himself, sit that pitch. And then you kind of get into this mental chess match of like, what is the batter thinking that I'm thinking that he's thinking that I'm thinking? It's like you can go as many layers deep as you need to, but it's both parties are privy to all the information in that game. So it's
Hejka,
or at least all the historical context leading up to it.
How do you find yourself thinking on the mound? Because just from conversations with you, I can imagine you, I don't mean this in any derogatory way, thinking like that about a certain, like something we're talking about at work. Like we get in these conversations about complex things and back and forth. Do you find like on the mound you have a different conviction, or are you kind of more wishy-washy there too?
I think the big thing that I'm leaning into this year in particular is my kind of mantra is that I think one of my the previous coaches with the Mets called it like a universal guiding intention, I think is the big phrase he used for it. But essentially, when in doubt, so for context for those who don't know me, I'm a submarine pitcher. I'm really, really, I don't throw very hard, but I've, pretty distinct, unique shapes. and I'm far third base side, so I'm releasing from really, really crazy release points. And kind of my idea is that I want to just lean into making the batters as uncomfortable as possible. And the reason I kind of like that as an approach rather than this idea of, oh, I need to, and this maybe is even going against myself as an analyst here, but rather than just saying, okay, I throw these 3 pitches in these 3 locations against right-handed hitters, and I throw these 3 pitches in these 3 locations against left-handed hitters. I think the ability to do all those things is great. And I think there's a level of information the batter's giving you in the moment that a model will never be able to give you.
Yep.
And I think we can try our best to get there. But what that kind of intention allows me to do is it number one, it forces me to know what I can and can't do. So if I'm facing a right-handed hitter, like I have to be able to get that ball in on him to make him uncomfortable most of the time, because that's I'm coming from such an extreme release point. The pitch is moving in. So being able to recognize that I need to be able to execute those kind of pitches, and it gives me the confidence of like, it doesn't really matter that I'm throwing in on a guy, because it's allowing me to like lean into this idea of making him uncomfortable. And then it forces me to be attuned to what he's telling me after each individual pitch.
Yep.
Which once again goes to this kind of chess match idea, but I think for the most part, at least in the minor leagues, guys aren't necessarily thinking that deeply with their approaches on in the batter's box. And it's hard, even if you do kind of expect this kind of uncomfortable thing coming next pitch. Sometimes it is hard to just like adjust to it that quickly and be able to like sit that pitch. So kind of leaning into that idea and just trying to make the batters uncomfortable as possible. And part of understanding what makes the batters uncomfortable is like understanding from a stuff perspective, like where my pitches play best, like where they are expected to kind of get these best results. Because where a batter's uncomfortable is where he's probably going to like make weak contact or swing and miss or like take a called strike because he's like not even expecting that pitch. So it does kind of play hand in hand. It is a little, there is probably some differences between myself as a player and myself as an analyst, but I'm comfortable with my cognitive dissonance for now.
No, I think it's, yeah, go ahead, Marek.
Just there is a way to understand just how uncomfortable you make a batter feel, and it's getting yourself on the trajectory board and then standing in against yourself, which I would recommend as an underused drill that I've heard some teams, I think it was the Angels, kick around for some of their guys, and that just like opened up a whole new world of possibilities for pitchers. I think I heard Friedman talk about how Ohtani still hasn't stood in against himself. But yet another plug for sort of things we have.
If Ohtani stands in against himself, he will throw every pitch down the middle for the rest of his life. He will never give anyone a chance to hit that. I think Hejka has a unique issue. I think you throw too low for the trajectory.
Yeah, so I was going to say my favorite part about trajectory is that it does not get low enough for my release height. So
that's bad.
Hopefully they never fix that problem. I hope that's
yeah.
And I think when we talk about all these things, we're talking about all these models and all that, and I think it kind of lives inside this vision that I have, and I kind of compare Driveline to like Apple in a way, and this might be
we are starting off hot.
This is Kyle Bodie, Steve Jobs, but I think in my mind, you have an iPhone and you need headphones. You're like, okay, I'm gonna get AirPods because they seamlessly, all the Bluetooth options kind of seem similar. So I'm going to go with the one that most seamlessly interfaces with my phone, right? So now I have iPhone and AirPods. It's like, okay, now it's time to get a laptop. And it's like, okay, all the options seem pretty similar. There's some slight distinction. Maybe some are slightly better, some are slightly worse. But at the end of the day, I want to go for the option that's like most seamlessly a part of the ecosystem that I'm already in. So I'm going to get a Mac, right? And then it's like, I'm going to get an Apple Watch. And so it's like, once you're inside this Apple ecosystem, it's basically impossible to leave, because you're not just in the Apple ecosystem for an iPhone. You're in the Apple ecosystem for like 5 different devices. And the way I kind of think about Driveline is that all of the parts of Driveline gel so well together. And it's, I'm training in the off season. I do a pitch design session. I use the models that we have to basically determine my approach for adding a pitch, right? So I figure out my mix and match and figure out what pitch I should add. And then I use the stuff models to figure out what the best shape for that pitch is, right? And then I go off to I go train, and I go and it's on my track profile, and I can see exactly what workouts I have to do to gain velocity. And then I can do my armcare.com thing and it uploads into my track so I can see exactly my readiness. And then for my strength assessment every week, we can, or every block, I can get an update as to how my strength metrics are progressing. And then I go off to play in season and I get post-game reports based on all these models and all these metrics that I'm already familiar with. It just seems like it's such a cohesive system where all the different aspects play so well together and fit so well together. That's the reason I still train at Driveline is obviously I think we each of those individual components are very competitive on their own, if not the best on their own, and in a lot of different ways. But the sum of the whole, or the
Sum of the
sum is
part.
greater than the whole.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that correctly. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts,
There you go.
and the parts are great on their own. So, and do not cut this as an ad, Driveline. This is not coherent enough to be used.
No, I think.
But
Go ahead.
yeah, no, I think that's just kind of my spiel. Is I think everything works so well together. It's a great experience.
I would generally agree, although I have only recently started training on my velo journey, so I can't speak from the athlete perspective. But I think I find it interesting you left off maybe your favorite product, and probably the last part of R&D we'll touch on in this episode, Pulse, the arm care unit that helps you just track your in-season workload, off-season workload, just make sure you're ready to go at all times. Hejka, as a reliever that is bouncing up from team to team in the minors, do you want to kind of speak on the value of Pulse, what it is, and how you utilize it both off-season and in-season?
Yeah, I mean, I think just I'm assuming most of our listeners are pretty familiar with Pulse. It's a monitor you can wear in your arm, tracks the number of throws and the intensity you can make, or the intensity you make with each of those throws. But I think one of the fitting into this theme of why an R&D department is so important. One of the products we're rolling out now are these in-season workload projections. And so essentially for in-season relievers and I believe in-season starters coming soon, what we can essentially do is, we understand all your strength metrics from the off-season. We understand who you are as a pitcher from the off-season. We understand what your workloads tend to look like, when you tend to perform your best, when you tend to get a little fatigued and your performance starts suffering. And in season, we can basically give you a recommendation for how much you should throw before a game to make sure that you're in an optimal spot once the game actually comes around. And I think that's just a beauty of a product that you can never get somewhere else. Because it's so reliant on the rest of the Driveline ecosystem.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's one of my favorite additions or new products or new tools recently. It's just this ability to basically in season, I'm going to use it myself every day. I'm going to look at my track. I'm going to see what should my pregame workload be to basically make sure I'm in the best possible place if I do end up having to pitch today.
Yeah, and this is also an extension of modeling from the R&D side. There is research we have done that have found the ideal ratios of, correct me if I'm wrong, Hejka, put roughly your weekly workload as opposed to your monthly workload should be roughly within a certain range for the sake of preventing the likelihood of injury. It's not saying you won't get injured. It's not saying you will get injured. It's just based on probabilistic studies we've seen. Just knowing where you are from a workload perspective, how many pitches can you throw on a given day? Are you ready for the start of the season? And I know you've mentioned, you said you start off the season hot usually because you think partially attributed to the way you manage your workload leading up to the season, getting ready for that full season workload, not jumping off the deep end. Is that right?
Yeah, I think part of it is that I come into the season with my chronic workload much higher than other athletes. Chronic workload meaning what I'm quote unquote built up to handle, what I've done over the last month or so. Yeah, I think that plays a big part in why I've been able to start off so strong the last few seasons. And something I'm going to write an article about very soon is how we can use Pulse to basically build relievers to handle back-to-backs, which I think is something that not a lot of organizations do thoughtfully. A lot of organizations don't even have guys throw back-to-backs Then they get to the majors, and then in the majors, you're never going to tell your manager, no, I can't pitch today. So you end up throwing
Yeah.
back to back, 3 out of 4 days, 4 out of 5 days, back to back, and then off day, and then another back to back. And so you're basically not putting your guys into the best possible situation to perform once they're in the majors. Like there's ways we can build guys up to handle that, using Pulse, using that data to understand when they're prepared to handle that additional stress. So it's just a very, very useful tool.
I was just going to say it's anecdotally interesting that IL stints always peak in March and April, which is likely a cause of not being ready to handle that full workload, taking the off season almost too soft. Do you think that's an accurate kind of view of what that is? I mean, not claiming that's the only reason, but
yeah, I think it plays a big role. I think a lot of people show up to spring training unprepared, historically at least. I do know there's probably some bias there because of
ongoing
many
injuries
guys
aren't reported
report their-
until
yeah.
yeah.
But I do think there's something there.